Are you one of those people who drive around in neighborhoods in the spring and go, oh my gosh, I love all those beautiful tulips, I want some? Well, if you want some, you have to plant them in the fall. Now's the time to plant them. Let me show you. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank our sponsors. The garden tours are made possible by Gilbert H. Wild & Son, who've been growing beautiful perennials since 1885. Ralston Family Farms, a farm family producing delicious rice for your table. First Community Bank, whose heart is in the community, as well as Sun Patience, Super Cal Petunias, and Dragon's Breath Celosia. And Crystal Bridges, Museum of American Art. Check out my website to learn more about the brands we love. Who doesn't love spring flowering bulbs? Well, I certainly do. Tulips are one of my all-time favorite flowers. If you love tulips and you have a favorite color, I'd love to know what you love. Mine, well, I'm crazy about these apricot colored ones. I plant them everywhere. And I'm planting some called Minton. And this is the time of year to do it. It's fall. If you want those spring blooms in March and April and May, you gotta plant them now. So what I've done here is I've prepared a bed. Now this isn't going to be all bulbs. We're going to overplant it later with some things. But what I like to do is work the soil up. And you can see that the soil is really deep. So I can drive this trowel into the ground almost 9 inches. And that's what you want. When I plant bulbs, I want a lot of visual impact. I tend to plant a lot of the same variety or varieties that work together in terms of color. I also want to think of when they bloom. You may not know this, but depending on the variety of tulip you choose, you can get varieties that bloom early in the season, midway in the season, and late in the season. So when you're thinking about planting some tulips this fall, and I hope you will, think about that because you can have a continuous bloom. In this case, since I'm so crazy about Minton, I'm going to do a big grouping of them here, a grouping of them there, and then one down there. Then I'm going to fill in with a lot of spring blooming annuals over them. And I'm telling you, next spring, this flower bed will be a knockout. So let's get back to planting these bulbs. When I plant the bulbs, I like to plant them about 25 to a group, a nice drift. And I plant them, you know, about 8 inches apart. And one of the rules for depth is to plant the bulb 3 times. You want to cover the bulb 3 times its width. So if it's this wide, 1, 2, 3, you'd want it about that deep. And so I've dug a hole about that deep here. You just take a little fertilizer. I like to use an organic fertilizer for bulbs, specifically blended for it. About a tablespoon in there, and I work it around a little bit, and then I drop the bulb in. You want the flat end or the basal plate in toward the soil, like that. And what I like to do is go along and plant them so I can see them. So this one I'll come in, and I'll put this one next to this one so I can see exactly where they are. You get the idea. Put a little fertilizer in there, drop it in. Then I'll work my way around and I'll have this entire bed planted. Then I can decide whether I need to protect them, because I know a lot of you have asked me questions about how do you protect your tulip bulbs from squirrels. Well, one of the best things to do is once you get the bed planted, you can take some chicken wire, and this is coated with a little black plastic so you don't see it, and you can just roll this out over the top of the bed and just leave it there. Cover it with leaves, cover it with mulch, whatever you want. This will keep those little rascals from digging up your tulip bulbs. Then, when winter is over, and when you just begin to see the tips of those little bulbs pushing up, you can take the chicken wire off, put the mulch back around it, the bulbs will come up. At that point, the squirrels don't really care because the bulb is already rooted in. It's no longer a bulb, it's a full-grown plant, and your bulbs will come up and bloom beautifully. This is a trick that's really worked well for me over the years. So when those temperatures begin to cool, make sure you go to the garden center and get lots of bulbs and get them planted. You'll be glad you did in the spring. Who doesn't love daffodils? What's there not to love? They're so beautiful and reliable. But you may have trouble getting your daffodils to bloom. So what I want to do is I want to point out the 5 things that keep daffodils from flowering year after year. Number 1, daffodils need to be planted in the sun. They love full sun, and they can take some partial shade. If you're growing them in a shady area, they're probably not going to come back for very long. The next thing that keeps daffodils from not blooming is that over time, the clumps become, well, too congested. They need to be separated and divided. If you'll separate and divide them, depending on the variety, about every 3 to 5 years, you'll get continuous bloom. The next or third reason daffodils don't continue to bloom is that we cut the foliage back way too soon. Let it last. In fact, let it last as long as it can. That's the best way. But if you have to cut the foliage back, let the bloom fade, and after that, 6 weeks later, you can cut the foliage back, and it will not keep the flowers from blooming the next year. The fourth reason why daffodils may not bloom is they're hungry. They need to be fed. This is the time of year you can just take some granular fertilizer and sprinkle it around the plants. Feed the foliage and let that foliage last as long as it can. It can die back naturally. What happens is this foliage will energize those bulbs for lots of blooms next year. And the final reason they often don't bloom is the soil conditions aren't quite right. See how this slopes, it drains really well, but there's enough clay in the soil that it holds moisture. Daffodils do need moisture, but don't plant them where they're going to sit all winter in wet, soggy soil. You know, anytime I tell someone that I plant a fall vegetable garden, they go, "Whoa, fall? What can you grow in the fall? I thought it was getting cold." Well, there are actually vegetable plants that prefer the cool weather. I mean, they like it cold. For instance, this Brussels sprout row I've got here, just look at these gorgeous plants. I mean, I'll grow them just to look at the beautiful plants, but they're all edible. And just over here is arugula. It likes it cool too, so if you love rocket, that sort of really peppery green that you can put in all kinds of salads, it's so easy to grow. I mean, it'll germinate so quickly from seed, you can almost stand there and watch it come up. And hey, look at my cabbage. Love this little cabbage. It's called a 45-day cabbage, meaning that once I set out the plants in 45 days, I get a nice head, and you can see firm head of cabbage forming up right here. Week or two, I'll have enough cabbage here for all the coleslaw I can eat. I can even make sauerkraut. And right next to it is ruby chard, and I love the bright red stalks of the ruby chard. It's so beautiful. And over here, just look how gorgeous this is, and I'm telling you, it is ready to pick now. Look at the head on this thing. So I'm just going to reach in here and take that off. That is one beautiful head of broccoli. From the garden home, I'm Alan Smith. Hey, gourd head, why don't we take something useless and get creative? You know, gourds are pretty fascinating. I think to me, because they're useless in today's society, we don't need them for dippers or vessels or tools like we did thousands of years ago. But I do think they have a place when it comes to decorating. That's why I keep them around. It can be really cool for any kind of table decoration you might want to do, something kind of fun and funky, or something for the holidays. Just look at some of these. This is a dipper gourd. It would be used to dip water. And this is a bird's nest gourd. And this is a baby caveman club gourd. We also have snake gourds and also one called an apple gourd growing right here on this trellis. They're wonderful. I planted them back once the soil got warm in the late spring, and the vines, well, they just grew like you cannot believe. And they've produced all these different gourds. And the best time to collect them, if you want to dry them, is when they begin to turn. Of course, I'm picking some of them green because I want to use them for a tablescape. But what you ideally want is for them to begin to dry like this. The seed will rattle. It takes about 3 to 4 months for gourds to dry. You want to keep them in a cool, dark, dry place. And if they begin to get a little bit of mold on them, you want to wipe them off with a dilute solution of chlorine, and that will keep the mold at bay and let them dry completely. Gourds are about the easiest thing you can grow. They're perfect for kids to grow because there's something magical about them. They grow like a Jack and the Beanstalk, really. I mean, all they need is plenty of sun. You want full sun for them. The soil needs to drain. It doesn't need to hold water because the roots will rot. And you want to make sure that the gourd's roots stay consistently moist through the growing season to get the most abundant crop. And like I said, you can use these things for tablescapes, for table decorations. You can use them on the mantle. You can make wreaths or bird houses. Just imagine all the possibilities with these. Well, I have some guests arriving in just a few minutes, and I thought I'd go ahead and just show you how I put this table together. It's autumn, and I love to entertain this time of year because there's so many wonderful colors and there's such abundance that you can use. So why don't we talk about the plates first. The table's set for 6, and I love to dine outside as long as I can before it gets too cold. What I have here are some round placemats that are made of a bamboo material. I love the dark, almost coffee bean brown color set against these plates, which are more of a caramel color. And then I've used some chocolate napkins and just some basic tableware. If you look at the center of the table, that's where it really gets interesting, and this is where you can have some fun. What I did is I structured this in a way where I used large, small, and medium-sized objects. I started with the large objects first, and you can see I used 5 large gourds. These big green gourds, here's 2 of them here, an orange pumpkin, and then 2 more green gourds, as you can see here. And then the next size object would be these bouquets. I love zinnias. Of course, it seems like the chrysanthemum is the flower for the fall season, but I love zinnias, and they're so easy to grow. You see, the seed will germinate in 5 to 10 days, and you can have flowers in as few as 35 days up to 60 days. And I like to plant these in late summer, particularly these autumnal colors. They're really beautiful. And you can take about 25 blooms and gather them together in the garden and bundle them, and you just place them in a clear glass, as I've done here, and just tuck them in among those large gourds. Then I equally distributed some of these cast iron pieces like this crow and this acorn, and you see I used 4 of those because I have a pair of each. Crow here, acorn, crow, and acorn there. So I created this structure, and then I filled in with 45 of these little gourds and just tucked them in all these different various places. And right on the outer edge, I used these glass candle holders, which I love because as they warm, these earth tones begin to illuminate the entire table. What I like to do is take a clear glass votive and drop it inside here because I don't want the fire to shatter these gorgeous containers. As you can see, I kept the entire arrangement very low. I assembled the large things first, brought in the medium-sized objects, and then repeated them all the way down. And then the last touch is to illuminate them with these candles. Now, I better get these lighted because I've got guests coming in just a few minutes. You know, you can use apples for a lot more than just eating. You know, I'm always looking for interesting ways to display ordinary things, like candles on a table for a party. So it's the fall of the year. What's plentiful out there? Certainly apples. You can find them at a farmer's market, a farm stand, you can go to the orchard, or you can just pick them up in the grocery store. What I'm doing here is I'm actually making some little apple candle holders for a festive table decoration. These are really easy to make, and let me just show you. It's as simple as taking an apple that, well, you want to make sure that apple will sit by itself and sit upright so it doesn't roll around on the table for obvious reasons. This one is doing a sterling job. And I have one here that I've just placed a votive candle on the top, and I used a pen just to go around and score the exact diameter of it. And you can see that circle there. Now it's just a matter of taking a little paring knife and cutting directly into the apple, straight in like this, and cutting very carefully around the edge. And then you can take a melon baller, which has a sharp edge, and you can just take out that core of the apple. See how simple this is? You get a nice clean cut edge with this melon baller. Okay, then it's just a matter of sort of sizing the candle. It's better not to make it too large in the beginning because you can always cut it out, but you can't put it back in there. All right, so there we go. You can see that fits just about right with just a little pressure. What I like to do to keep the edges of the apple from shriveling, because we've cut into it, it's likely to dehydrate and it will discolor, as we know apples will. You can take just a little bit of lemon juice, this, and apply it to the flesh of the apple like that. That'll keep it from discoloring, at least for your party. Now, the other thing that I've done with pumpkins and acorn squash and things like that I've cut, you can actually take a little petroleum jelly or Vaseline and rub right around the edge, and that will seal this off and keep it from losing moisture and shriveling around the edge. Just another little tip. You see this sits in just like that, and then you can light it and you can let some of the candle wax drip around the edges like I have here to sort of seal that gap, if there is one, between the candle and the apple itself. Now, you can see I have an arrangement here that the colors work beautifully with this. And just imagine these lining a table, all lighted with these beautiful arrangements. It can make a magical table setting. There are all kinds of winter projects you can do to bring life or a little bit of the garden into the home. And one of the simplest is to just take a flower bulb, like one of these Paperwhite narcissus, and grow them into something gorgeous and fragrant. Now, what's interesting about Paperwhites is that you can grow them as long as you give them a little water and a little light and some warmth. What I'm talking about here is once you apply water to whatever medium you're growing them in, whether it's soil like this, or gravel, or in just water alone, they will begin to germinate and bloom within 6 weeks, okay? And you want to make sure that the temperature for the Paperwhites is between 65 and 75 degrees, and you don't want to keep them in direct sunlight. Now, I grow these in lots of different ways. I like to mass them in a big bowl like you see here, growing in soil, or you can take a bulb and drop it in a glass container like that, add a little water. You can even pour some gravel over the top, and that flower will grow right out of the top and bloom. They're really indestructible. You see, what's great about them is that the flower is already in the bulb. And I'm going to sacrifice this one just to show you the baby flower. You see right there? There's the embryo of that flower. And all you have to do is give it some moisture, give it the temperature I just described, and some sunlight, and it will begin to grow and flower for you. Now, one thing that you can do is you can take these and plant them in containers and stage them. If you keep them slightly cooler, you're going to slow down the growth. What I like to do is plant on a weekend 2 or 3 containers and then stagger them as I bring them into the house. So I can keep them in sort of a cool area like the garage and then bring them into the house where the temperature is in that 65 to 75 degree range, and they'll bloom. So you can have sequential blooms all the way through the winter. So make sure you buy plenty of bulbs and keep them in storage in the refrigerator. Now, one last point. If you store them in the refrigerator, you want to make sure that they're not in contact with, or really in the same refrigerator with, apples or produce that give off ethylene gas, because that little embryo that I showed you will be destroyed by that gas. So if you can keep your Paperwhite bulbs, or any other bulb for that matter, in a refrigerator that where they're alone and they're isolated, they're going to do much better for you. I have to tell you, the Amaryllis is one of the most rewarding plants that I grow in my house during the winter when it's really bleak outside. Just look at the flower power here. This bicolored variety is called Minerva. There's so many different colors of Amaryllis to choose from. You know what's fascinating about it is, while I've got these planted in some soil, you actually don't have to have soil to grow them and get them to bloom. If you take this soilless approach, just be sure to place beads, rocks, or other materials in the bottom of your container to keep the bulb from actually sitting in water. Now, to keep these flowers looking their best, place them in a cooler location in your home that doesn't get a lot of direct sunlight. Now, here's a little tip I want you to keep in mind. All plants are phototropic, meaning they lean toward the light, and Amaryllis certainly do. These lovely flowers will, well, move in that direction. To keep them centered and straight and not toppling over, you want to rotate the plant once a day, like this. Now, after all the flowers have wilted, you can cut the stems off near the base of the plant. You see, it's actually this foliage that fortifies the bulb such that it will produce another beautiful bloom next year. So when cold weather comes a-calling, have a little fun, brighten up your house, plant some Amaryllis. You'll be glad you did. One of my favorite gardening activities in the fall is to plant bulbs. Why? Well, it's so rewarding. It's almost fail-safe. You see, in each one of these tulip bulbs is a flower already packaged and ready to grow. All we have to do is put it in the right environment, coax it along, and presto, next spring, you wouldn't believe the blooms you'll get. Now, the easiest way I have learned to plant bulbs is in a container like this. Actually, what you're planting is a bouquet. You see, they're just going to be dormant for a while. Well, I say dormant, they're actually going to be growing, but you won't see them. I take bulbs like this and I plant them in a container about this size. Something that's about a 20-inch diameter terracotta is about right for 50 bulbs. And you can see I've filled this up with a good potting soil that's designed for container gardening. So I filled it up about halfway, and then what you want to do is you just want to simply take these tulip bulbs and place them in side by side until this entire basin is filled, just like this. Just takes a few minutes, and you want to make sure that you are placing the bulbs with the basal plate, this part down. You see that looks like a little candy kiss with a wrapper on it? That's the tunic of the tulip, and the roots come out of that end. The pointy side goes up, and you just press them in like that. All right, now it's time to cover those with about 3 inches of soil, maybe 4. And believe it or not, you're going to repeat the same procedure. We're going to line another layer of them. This is how you get that flower power I was talking about. By the way, this is a great project for kids. They love this. This kid loves it anyway. So next I'm just going to add another little layer of soil here. In the previous layer I had applied about 1/4 of a cup to 1/2 a cup of bulb food. I like to use an organic bulb food, so that'll feed those. And now I'm going to add a little more soil because I want to finish this off. Now you may think, well, what's going to happen with those tulips? They're stacked on top of each other. Well, believe me, Mother Nature has equipped them with the ability. They will find their way up around one another over the course of the winter and the early spring. Okay, so I've got soil here on top, and I think we can do better than this. So why don't we overplant it with some of these marvelous pansies. This is a really fun variety of pansy, which is one that actually cascades. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just gently tear the roots a little bit and completely cover this pot. So yes, the tulips will not only push up between themselves and reach the sun, they will also push up between these pansies. What I love about this particular variety is that it actually cascades. So it's perfect for a container like this because they'll spill over the edge. This variety is called Purple Rain. And you can see it's bright purple flowers, and they're going to be a gorgeous contrast to the color of these tulips. You've probably been wondering throughout this entire segment what color of tulip I planted. Well, it's one of my favorites. It's apricot in color, grows about this tall, and the variety is called Minton, and it is a blue ribbon winner. So give it a try. All right, now with the pansies planted, I'm going to take some all-purpose fertilizer here, make sure all of these are well fed as well. What's great about pansies and their cousin, the viola, which has a smaller flower, is that they're a low light bloomer, so they'll bloom in the winter. You just want to make sure that you keep them well fed, and that's what I'm doing here. I love to use an organic fertilizer. Now, this technique for growing tulips works well if you live in mild parts of the country. Granted, this pot can freeze, so I don't want to set it in a saucer. I don't want the clay pot to break. One of the things you can do is you can actually plant these tulips like this in plastic pots. If you live in a part of the country where it's really, really cold, you can actually drop the container down into the soil so the tulips feel like they're planted in the ground. Or you can wrap this with wire and put straw around it and insulate it. There are a lot of different ways to sort of give the bulbs a little bit of protection. But all the way up until zone 6, this technique has worked really well for me. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and be sure to ring the bell for notifications.